All right, everyone, welcome to our February webcast. We're very excited to have you joining and watching this, whether you're watching live or you're watching the recording or whatever. It's been an exciting month for us. It's been an exciting few months for us. But hopefully you are very aware of the big changes that we rolled out on Tuesday. I know, all the stuff we've been showing you, a lot of stuff pop up, and it's really exciting to be in this new preview refresh area. It took a lot of work to kind of shift things over, create the managed APIs, and now that we're here, we can really start running on some of these features. I think you'll see that as Kevin starts with this slide on some of the features that are coming up and how fast we're going to be running now. So to start off, welcome. This is our monthly webcast. I'm Jeff Holland, a program manager for Azure Logic Apps, and I'm joined as always by
Kevin Lamb, another program manager on Logic Apps.
That's right. So excited for you to join. Just want to let you know, if you're watching this live on YouTube right now, you'll probably see a little ribbon that popped up in your video player that says link to the Hangout. You can click that to open the Google Hangout, and that will allow you to do things like, one, most importantly, add applause. So you can click an applause button and give us little green thumbs up. But the second one, which is almost just as important, you can ask questions. So there's a Q&A feature, and as we go throughout the presentation at the end, we'll take time to answer those questions. You can also tweet your questions to us at logicappsio, or even send us an email to logicappslive@microsoft.com. So every way imaginable to ask us questions, and we hope you do. We've got some fun stuff we want to show you. And I think to start with, Kevin, you're actually just going to jump right into some stuff that's coming up.
Let's set this whole thing up.
So let me go ahead and share out. This is always the fun part. I love this part of the webcast where I'm sharing out my screen. Let's go ahead and add my desk, share this.
I'm not sure that website.
Yeah, I know. You have no idea. I do like 8 checks before every webcast of like, do I have anything open I shouldn't have open? But I don't, at least not yet. See, all right, let's jump over to your deck. Here we go.
All right.
Okay.
This is our webcast. So what's new? Dun, 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 dun. Of course, we have our updated designer. We're very, very excited to finally release our updated designer. And there are a bunch of capabilities that we've added to that designer so that you can start parting on the capabilities that we've been putting in the last few months into the language. One of the great things now is manual triggers. So with manual triggers and responses, now you're able to construct your Logic app as a request response capability, and you don't need to use the HTTP listener connector anymore. Those manual triggers are first-class engine capabilities, so you're now going through the data plane to access the workflow instead of going through the management plane or through other connectors to get to that endpoint. The other capability we've added in the designer is HP plus Swagger. So what that means is if you have an API out there and you have Swagger for that API, you plug in your Swagger to the HP plus Swagger and you get a first-class experience in the designer so that you can see all the properties and elements of that API. And it looks just like all the other first-class managed connectors that we have.
This is actually cool. I actually was talking to someone this week who used this because Cortana Analytics actually has their data services models. And so for many of those, they have Swagger definitions for them. So they have like a text analysis machine learning model, and they were able to reference the Swagger doc of that model and now call into the machine learning thing to do text analysis without having to create any custom APIs.
That's right. So that's really going to save you a bunch of work. It's like, oh, I wanted to write this cool wrapper so I can explain, so I can easily use it. You don't have to do that anymore.
No code.
You get that for free, no code. Yeah. I see any claps.
I know, yeah, I close that. There better be.
And then if-else conditions. So now, instead of kind of imagining, what your conditions could be in the designer and having to open the code view or look at the little conditions box, we actually first-class if-else in the designer, so you can now see which steps will actually go down a certain branch and do that as a first-class method. I'm sure there are a lot of other capabilities that we've added in the designer. If you've seen the webcast before, you could see that the designer is much snappier. It's now vertical instead of horizontal. Cards collapse, so you can have much more real estate into your designer. So there's a lot of improvements that we've had there. I'm just calling out some of the major ones. Functionality.
Yeah.
There we go. Managed APIs. This is another big one. So in our previous version, we were requiring you to upload your own API apps. That was with the API apps v1. We had a lot of marketplace connectors that you can go and upload. That created a lot of challenges. And one is in your design experience, you're doing deployment of web apps and gateways. It's riddled your definition with constructs for Zumo tokens and references to URLs that you really didn't understand. So we removed all that. We have taken over the management of the out-of-box APIs, and they're pre-deployed in our infrastructure. So then when you go ahead and reference those, now you can just reference the managed API and start using it. You don't have to deploy anything to make that happen. So all you now have to do is create a connection, and the connection is merely config. That config is a first-class resource so that you can go ahead and deploy it as an entity, but it's merely a simple set of properties that you go ahead and put up there. So that makes your deployments way easier. Your ARM deployment template will really straightforward and actually makes sense as you look at it. And then you can manage those connections across environments.
It's true. I was actually able to make a deployment template, whereas before I was always copying and pasting samples and then switching out the things. But yeah, it took we'll talk about our blog, but I was able to take a deployment template that was 350, 400 lines, and with this new model, it drops it down to only about 150. So it's awesome. It's awesome.
And also with managed APIs, we worry about those what were previously known as connectors. So if anything goes wrong with them, we have alerts and monitoring, and we service those things. We make sure that they scale properly, so you don't have to worry about how to host those and scale those out. And finally, a triggers blade. So before we had a little trigger history part, and we still have that there, so you can look at your trigger history. But now your workflows can actually have multiple triggers. The designer doesn't support that yet, but we soon will. But with the multiple triggers in your workflow, now we have a separate trigger blade experience, so you can actually see all of the triggers that you have in your workflow. And then for the manual triggers, then we also expose the SAS URL, so you can go right to the portal, copy that SAS URL, and hit run, do a post on that SAS URL, and then it'll work. You don't have to go and actually go to Postman to dig out the SAS URL yourself. So next, again. So what's coming up? Run now with recurrence triggers. So in this current release of the designer, we've added support for run now for manual triggers only. So if you have a recurrence trigger, you can't do the run now experience. But we will add that to allow your workflows that just have a recurrence trigger to be run. As a little trick, there's a workaround to make that work. Is you can actually, alongside your recurrence trigger, you can add a manual trigger, and then you'll actually have that run endpoint that you can call, and it'll just work. Now, the downside of that is the designer doesn't know how to render that, so you'd be stuck in code view. But that's going to come.
We're working on it, yeah.
Designer support for parallel action. So in our first click stop, if you go ahead and remove any of your dependence on capabilities, the designer doesn't quite render your parallels correctly. So we're going to do that in our next release to make sure that your workflows don't look confused and convoluted, so you get to see parallel actions. But parallel actions is supported in the language, it just doesn't render real well in the designer. So designer improvements. The first thing we're going to do is, of course, support for parallel actions. I duped that one. Auto discovery of custom APIs. We'll actually see it.
Yeah, we'll show this. This one's very close. This one's very close.
That's right. So you'll see that coming out really, really soon. And then finally, auto discovery workflow. So we're just completing the call workflow work in the engine, and then we'll expose that just like you'll see in the demo for auto discovery of your custom APIs, which is if you have an API app, web app, mobile app that has an app definition in your subscription, we'll go find that and give it a first-class experience in the portal. We'll do the same thing for workflows. If you have a workflow defined in your subscription, we'll find that workflow and then have you be able to have a first-class experience for calling it from the designer. And flow monitoring. So flow monitoring will give you a nice view of looking at your workflow history, but actually with the designer in place, so that you can see which steps actually it followed without looking at the text lines that we had before. So you can look at your designer, see which paths it took, which ones were skipped, and you'll get a nice icon view, details about the status of each of those steps.
Yeah, so we haven't really talked about this one before, but the design I was looking at and playing with a little bit earlier was just imagine you've got your designer view that has your nice steps, but now with each of those steps, you can click in and see here were the inputs and outputs the last time it ran. Here's the status. If it has a for loop, you can even say like at for loop item 6, right? What was happening? So it's a really cool way to visually be able to debug and see how data is flowing throughout your logic app.
Next. And I think finally,
yes,
one more. Enabling Salesforce Sandbox. Everybody who's been using Salesforce has been asking us for this. So Salesforce has their production Salesforce endpoint. They also have a sandbox Salesforce endpoint where a lot of people do their development off of. In our current connection model, we can only have one URI for that, the way our connections work for that managed API. We are going to go and address that and really soon have a release to allow you to pick either the sandbox or the production.
There is one.
And improve trigger user experience. So we've introduced new blades for that trigger experience I explained earlier. It's a little sparse today, but we are going to add more capabilities in those trigger blades so you get more information out of those triggers. And of course, please come to our Logic App forums. We have a number of ways that you can access us in the forum space anyway. So Azure blog, so aka.ms Logic Apps blog. That's where Jeff does a lot of posting. And
yeah, honestly, I think in the last 2 weeks, there's been 4 or 5 blog posts. So if there's ever a question that I get asked more than 3 or 4 times, then I just start now throwing up a blog on the blog post. So there's things here on walking you through creating a deployment template, using BizTalk and API Apps v1 in a Logic app. I can't even remember some of the other ones I've done. I think manual triggers up there. So yeah, so check out the blog, and it's honestly probably a good thing to subscribe to just keep up to date on. Here's some how-tos of frequently asked questions.
If you have any issues or questions for us, please use the MSDN blog. Go post your issue up there, and we'll go address it from that blog endpoint. Or you can see what other answers people have had. If they've had an issue, then you don't have to ask the question because you'll see the answer to that question in that blog. And finally, if there's a feature that you're looking for, go ahead and vote for one that's already there, or create your own feature request. Now that we've released the new designer, we've actually closed a bunch. So go ahead and please put those up there, and we'll address those as they come.
Definitely. And that helps us too. I know some people, you'll notice, even if you email me directly, which you're more than able to do, and say, hey, here's something I want, it's easier for us to track it when you create an item here in user voice because it's persistent and it's kept with all the other requests as well. So please feel free to contact and reach out to us directly on Twitter or email or whatever, but it does help if you also create or vote for an item on user voice, and that way I don't forget about it or I don't log a backlog item or whatever. So yes. Good. Should we go with the demo?
Yeah, we go with the demo.
Let's do it. No, that's fine. It probably won't let you because you're not hosting it.
Yeah.
I am the answerer.
We're not ignoring your
question. I am the one who knocks. Okay. Let's show you a demo. So you'll notice first off, I have this beautiful orange bar, which means I'm in our testing environment because I'm going to be showing off some features that we finished coding, but we're just finishing the last few steps before we release it publicly, but these are coming very soon. So what I actually want to work through first is a question that's come up a lot, and maybe it's come up for some people who are watching this, which is, hey, I love the new designer, it's very cool, but some of the APIs that I've been using before, maybe it's a custom API or like a BizTalk API, like BizTalk X12 or Edifactor, all those other things. I don't see them, so how do I use them? Those are still supported, still very doable. Everything I'm talking about now in terms of that, I just published a blog post this morning at the blog link Kevin listed, aka.ms/logicappsblog. But if you go into the marketplace, like if I say new here, and if I start typing in like JSON encoder, you'll see that that API app is still there. I just need to deploy it from the marketplace first as an API v1 app. Now, before I even show you, so here's a JSON encoder app I just did. As I go into more detail, let me explain a little bit of some of the changes that happened between API apps v1 and v2, as it might help answer some questions. So in API apps v1, you had this kind of API service, this resource called an API app, which was really sat on top of your website and provided some functionality like cores or authentication wrapping or things like that. Swagger was one of the things. But the actual meat of the work was still done by a website in the background. And so what we're going to do now to have this work best with Logic Apps, there are ways that you can still interface with this the same way. You have to use the gateway that it provisions and other things too. But the way that I recommend is actually just go into your application settings of the API app and switch the access level to public anonymous, which will let you pass all requests directly through to that API host. And then we're just going to work directly with the host. Now, that doesn't mean that you cannot add authentication to your apps. This is just saying we don't want to use kind of the out-of-the-box service app, API app as a service thing anymore, because with API apps v2, they took all this functionality that used to be kind of like this standalone wrapper, and they just did it as part of the website service. And so we can now just kind of bypass this resource that was deployed before and talk straight to our host. But you can still use Azure Active Directory authentication if you want, or if it's custom API, you can do whatever you want, certificate or whatever. So now all the rest of the work I'm going to do is actually going to be done in this host. So this is called either host or API app host, depending on the version of the API app. But if I click this, it's actually going to open up the Azure website. And this is the exact same settings as any Azure website that you have. So if you deploy an API app v2, this is the blade that you will see, which is just a website. But now we've added these, I think I scrolled past it. This API section, which you should be able to see on my screen, which now has cores and API definition and those things done out of the box. You'll also see here, I'll show you the option really quickly, but I'm not going to do it. If I come in here to, maybe I won't show you the option. Oh, authentication, yeah, authorization. This is where I could turn on things like turn on easy authentication to protect this API. There's an article in our documentation that goes on to details on how to do this and how to make sure you're setting up the service principal and Azure Active Directory pieces that you need. I'll give you the short URL, but you should be able to find it. It's aka.ms/logicapps-custom API. And that's an article that explains how to enable this authentication if you want to. I know, I've got a million whatevers. Okay, so the first few things that should be noted. So for now, I've deployed this JSON encoder API. The two settings I want to make sure I've enabled are one, cores. And the reason I need to enable cores is because when I'm in the new Logic Apps Designer and I say, hey, I want you to go use HTTP plus Swagger, or you've listed my sites, it's going to go to this website and it's going to say, hey, I need to get your Swagger document. Now that request is actually going to come from your browser. And so your browsers get like azure.com, and you're making the request to an Azure websites.net page. And so your browser has a security setting that says, hey, I don't necessarily trust this domain. I don't know if I'm going to pull the document. So what cores does is it pretty much says, hey, if I get a request from azure.com, even though I'm Azure websites.net, that's cool, let them pass through. I usually just set this as wildcard. You could sniff out your network traffic and see what the actual host from your browser is. For most people in production, just so you know, this is going to be EMA1. I shouldn't actually say this. It's in the blog post. But if you don't want to do a wildcard course, you don't have to. But it is dependent on where your browser is making the request from. So cores is the first thing you want to set. The second thing you want to set, and we're going to work to make it so that this gets set automatically more easily for you, or at least as a setting that you can configure in things like Visual Studio. This is your API definition location. And this is a link to your Swagger document page. So I have a custom API hosted at azurewebsites.net. I use Swashbuckle for that. 9 times out of 10, this URL is going to be .azurewebsites.net/swagger/docs/v1. And that would actually return to me the JSON document that has my Swagger definition. Now, the reason you want to set this is because our designer knows that if you have a website with an API definition, that it wants to list it for you. So that's kind of the setup piece of it, and walking through why it works that way. Let me go ahead and open up the new designer, and I've got a blank API up here. Now, the first thing that you'll notice is we have this new blade up here to filter where I'm searching from, and my cursor just froze a little bit. That's fine. So you'll notice here right now I'm looking at Microsoft managed APIs. So I'm actually just going to add a manual trigger to do an HTTP request and response pattern. So let me go ahead and add that, and I'll show you what this blade does when I actually want to use it. So I can actually click this blade, and the icon, again, this is our test environment. We'll fix this icon. Now I can click, and it will look over my subscription, and it will list all of the websites that I have where I have defined an API definition. So you'll see here's that JSON encoder API that I was just looking at, and so I can filter that. As Kevin was saying, we're also going to be adding one to say list all the logic apps that I have, and so that you'd be able to call a nested logic app with this same kind of experience. So for now, the logic app I want to create is I'm going to send through a manual trigger an XML document. I want to use the JSON encoder to parse the XML document and then return to me a value. So we'll go ahead and when I click this JSON encoder, you'll see that it looked at that API definition and it says, hey, cool, I can tell that here's the things I want to do. I'm going to say I want to do XML to JSON. For now, I'm just going to use the default schema just to make this demo quick, but I can tell it whatever my input XML is going to be. And I actually do want to remove the outer envelope. And so now you'll notice when let me go ahead and just add the response object really quick. So I'll add the response object, and let's just say thanks for now. So when I switch back over to code view, you'll notice that I have all the code view pieces. It's going to remove the outer envelope. It's pointing now to that API app host. I'm not going to do any authentication right now. I'm just going to leave it like that. But that is now a working API app. So that I can save really this. Quick. Yeah, it's not bad. And the experience, I know the initial setup took some time, but being able to list those sites and easily incorporate them is not bad at all. So now if I open Postman and I send this XML document, which is my name, I'm going to go ahead and send that, and it's going to start that logic app and return to me the response of thanks. I actually should show you, because Kevin mentioned this. When I am at my blade now, here's this new manual trigger. So if I want to know what's the URL that I actually send a post to, here's that URL that I copy and that I'm using in Postman to send as a post to start that manual trigger. So there's that. I am sending, because I use the default schema, I'm just sending them JSON, but I am passing in this XML that it's parsing. And just to prove that it worked, let's actually just look at our run history at 10. This isn't up to date right now. At 11:21 is when I just ran that. You'll see my XML to JSON. I passed in this beautiful JSON or XML document, and it returned to me this beautiful JSON document. So I was able to use that functionality in a logic app today. The last thing I want to show you, this is kind of a longer demo, but it's cool, is a new function that's possible with the new designer. We've talked, or not with the new designer yet, but with logic apps today that we've talked about before, which is actually an HTTP webhook action. So we have here, you'll see I have a webhook trigger. Well, a kind of webhook trigger. This is a manual trigger, not really. I'm not subscribing. But this can be triggered from HTTP requests like a webhook. But there's also a way that in my app, I could say, hey, I want to start a step. And when I start that step, I'm going to go register a webhook somewhere. And then I just wait. And I will wait until I get a response back that says I can go forward in the form of a webhook. So I want to show you how you do that really quick. And actually, let me go ahead and open up request bin, which is a really cool debugging tool for HTTP in general. Because I'm going to send my webhook to request bin for now because I didn't set up a service. But kind of things you could do with this is like, I need to wait for approval, or I need to wait for a document or something to upload. So you could have this webhook step. And then once that event happens, you just fire the webhook with the needed information, and then your app would continue. The cool thing about this, right now, if you use this in code view, you'll notice this will time out after 1 day. But we actually have a fix that's been checked in. I believe it was checked in last night, so it will be deployed very shortly, where if you have a premium SKU, you could have a webhook action wait for up to a year. So you could have you could have a logic app that pauses and waits for up to a year for an action to happen before continuing. So that's pretty cool functionality. So to do this now, I'm going to actually use the designer to help start us out, because that helps me. I'm just going to do an HTTP action. I'm going to do a post to request bin, and that's actually all I'm going to use the designer for. Now I'm going to switch to code view because the designer doesn't support this natively yet. But how you do the webhook action is, first I'm going to change the type right here from HTTP to HTTP webhook. And for the input, I'm no longer just doing any input. This is actually a subscribe action, which is going to subscribe this webhook to that point. And for the body of this request, I actually want to call this action, and this is all documented in our MSDN, by the way. If you go to like the help, and it will link you to the MSDN docs, you'll see this. But I'm going to just post the list callback URL to request bin, which is going to give request bin, this URL, the link that I need to resume the flow. So if I go ahead and save this now, and let's go ahead and do a second post, and then we'll come over here too. So it's going to send the response back, which says thanks. And then after that response, it's going to register a webhook. So now if I refresh this, I should see a nice webhook that got registered. And you'll notice now, which is pretty cool, if I close this and I come into my run history, you'll see here I have this run now that is waiting, right? I've got this step which is waiting for I didn't rename it, it's still called HTTP, but it's waiting, and it will sit there and wait until finally, let's go ahead and open up a new tab, and let's call that webhook, and let's give it a body that just says go from the webcast, and we'll call that webhook action. It says okay, and now when I refresh this, you actually see that this Logic app is going to continue with the next steps, and it's going to have, it might actually be updated. Yeah, here's my output links. It's going to have the go from the webcast webhook that I'm able to continue my flow. So this is very useful to use. High five that one. Yeah, very useful to use to be able to pause flows. There's other ways to do long-running tasks. You could use the async pattern, which, surprise, surprise, I actually wrote a blog about as well to do that. But I just wanted to show that quickly so that you can see how that webhook action looks. You can start using it today in code view. That timeout will be extended very shortly. And yeah, hopefully that's a cool thing to see that we've said is coming for a while, and we can start using today.
That's some cool stuff.
Yeah, it's fun. Lots of stuff we showed, and lots more coming. So let me go ahead and open Q&A. We have one question, and let me select it. Kevin, you already read it. You already know what the question is.
Yes, I do.
Okay. Do all the old connectors from the marketplace have comparable managed API, or has some functionality been dropped?
So the answer is not yet. So we've done a lot of the connectors that you have in the marketplace today as managed APIs, but there are still some that we haven't made into managed APIs yet. But those will be coming.
That's right. So continue, and we still support. So if you're using those managed APIs and you have an issue, still let us know. We'll make sure that things are working for you. But for now, it's totally acceptable to use those V1 APIs until we get all the functionality up.
But try to use the V2 ones.
Absolutely, whenever you can.
APIs.
Yep.
Get off the old ones.
Absolutely. Okay, that's the only question for now, which is good. I know we had so many last time. We did such a good job. So let me check Twitter really quick. That's it.
Just a little more.
That's it. Great. So no questions, but we do have viewers. So we've got a lot of viewers right now. So that's awesome. Feel free to reach out to us on Twitter if you have any questions, or through email at LogicApps.io. You can email me, JEHOLLAN@Microsoft.com anytime you want. We did get one more question to pop up though, so we will answer it before we go, which is it possible to add App Insight to track information from a Logic app, or do you need to write an extra API to log information? So logging the actions. I know what the answers to this are. It's good answers. I just don't know what we're going to share on this webcast right now.
We'll see more information soon.
That's right. Yes. Keep in touch. So for now, you could use, so there's a few ways that you can do this now to keep track of your runs. So it's not a story we don't have an answer for. We have some cool stuff that's coming, just nothing we're going to announce yet. For one, we have our management API where you can get track of all your runs, their statuses, the inputs, the outputs, and the actions. The same stuff you see in the portal, you can query our managed API directly. There's also an SDK, which will help do that for you. And then the other option is, of course, you add logging steps within your app itself. So a popular model that I have used is adding a step in my Logic app to send some information off to an event hub. And then I can use services like Stream Analytics or just write an event hub consumer to keep track of those types of things happening. I think we've showed before on this webcast back in November or something using a Power BI dashboard. So those all work today. They're all definitely fine and supported. But it is a scenario that we also understand people want more, and we are listening. We'd love to keep adding things to user voice. If you have ideas on how you see this do, and tune into our next webcast in March. Maybe we'll have more to share on that one.
Yes.
Okay, awesome. Well, thanks everyone so much for joining. We hope to hear from you soon. Make sure you let us know too on Twitter or wherever what you think about these updates that we rolled out. We're really excited that you can get your hands on them now and play with them, and we're going to continue to add features, or if you run into issues, we'll fix the issues. But let us know if you're happy with the changes, if you've been able to do anything cool. Please, we are listening. We're all as a team listening to all those different forums. So thank you very much so much for your feedback to this point. And that's it.
All right, thanks guys.
Okay, thanks so much.